Okay, wonderful. Thank you all for joining. This week's Torah portion is Chayei Sarah, which is in the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis, and it is chapter 23 in Genesis. If you happen to be in the Blue Art Scroll Chumash that we use in the shul, it's page 106. So this is an incredible story, and it encompasses the first two matriarchs, the first two Jewish mothers, the culmination of the life of Sarah, who is Abraham's wife, who dies in the beginning of the Torah portion at the age of 127, and then the marriage of Isaac to Rebecca, to Rivka, who becomes the second matriarch of the Jewish nation. So it is also very much connected to the land of Israel, because we know that God had promised Abraham that he will inherit the land of Israel for him and his descendants. Now, when Abraham and Sarah got this promise, they had no children and no land. But that was the big promise. You're going to have children like the stars in the heaven, eternal nation, and you're going to have the land of Israel as the homeland for your nation. Now, here we are in 2023, some 3,800 years later, and we see that both promises were fulfilled. The Jewish people are numerous and like the stars of the heaven, eternal, everlasting. And at the same time, we have the land of Israel. But think about Abraham and Sarah, an elderly couple who are being told that although they have no children, they're going to have a great nation come from them and they're going to inherit the land of Israel. They had no children and no land. Well, this week's Torah portion is the first, they say a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. Well, the first step of that journey of 1,000 miles that has continued till today, 3,800 years later, the first step of the fulfillment of both promises, A, that you will have numerous children who will be eternal like the stars in the heaven, and B, they will inherit the land of Israel, the first step occurs in this week's Torah portion. Why is that? Because the first plot of land, the first deed, contract that the first Jew ever had for any portion of the land of Israel is in the opening section of this week's Torah portion. And the first marriage of a Jewish couple, Abraham and Sarah, when they got married, they weren't Jewish yet, quote unquote. They discovered God later. But the first child who was raised as a Jew, which was Isaac, Yitzchak, to his wife, Rebecca, also occurs in this week's Torah portion. In other words, if Abraham has a son, but he's not married, then the promise of your children being an eternal nation cannot be fulfilled. It's only through the wedding of Isaac to Rebecca, which now allows them to have children, the Jewish family can have continuity. So the land and the family, both of these promises, the first step in that journey begins in this week's Torah portion. But the Torah portion begins with the passing of Sarah, and that's when Abraham needs to acquire a burial plot, and he buys the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. Now, some of you may have been to Hebron, to the cave of Machpelah. We usually go there on our synagogue trips, and you've seen the first piece of land that the first Jew acquired in the land of Israel. And that's in the story of this week's Torah portion when Sarah dies, and Abraham needs to bury his wife, and he goes to a man by the name of Ephron to acquire the cave of Machpelah. Now, it's called the cave of Machpelah. The word Machpelah in Hebrew means double. It was a double cave, one on top of another. Now, before we get to the purchase of the land in Hebron as a burial plot, the acquisition, and the first roots that Abraham put down in the land of Israel, we opened the Torah portion with the verse that says the lifespan of Sarah was 127 years. She dies at the age of 127. Now, we know that's a very old age, but in those days, people lived a lot longer. We discussed that on other occasions, that God shortened the lifespan of man, but Sarah dies at 127. Now, there's so much commentary on this opening verse. The first thing is, the name of the Torah portion is the life of Sarah. But, if you have a necklace that says Chai, Chai means life. Chayei is the plural for life. It's like lives with an S at the end. Why does it say the lives of Sarah? It should have said the life of Sarah. And the answer is that there are many answers to this question, actually, but just to share one answer is that we're being reminded that our lives has two components to it. There's our physical existence, and then there is our soul. And life is really a marriage between a body and a soul. And, in a marriage, you live together with your spouse, but the marriage of the body and the soul is a constant marriage, relationship, bond between the body and the soul. So we have our physical existence and then our spiritual pursuits. We have to stay alive physically, right? We have to take care of our physical needs and survive in this world. But we always have to remember that there's a deeper dimension to life, which is our spiritual purpose and mission in this world. And it's interesting that Abraham is later going to say to Ephron, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. I am a resident and a foreigner in your midst. So Abraham's talking to the people, the Hittites. They were the nation that lived there at the time, the Hittites, or Hittites with an H. And there are no Hittites today, but there's a Jewish people today, right? So he says to the Hittites, or this man Ephron who owns the cave, he says, I am a ger, which means a foreigner, an alien, vitoshav, and a resident. Now, what in the world does this mean? It sounds like an oxymoron. Either you're a resident or you're a foreigner. Which one are you? So Rashi gives his classic answer that's quite famous. He says, look, there's two ways we could do business today. You could either treat me as a foreigner and charge me full price, and I'm happy to pay. But if you refuse to give me the land by sale, I will assert my rights as a resident. Why? Because God promised me that this land will be mine and my descendants. So I'll take it by right. So he was giving him like a subtle ultimatum. Either sell it to me and I'll act like a stranger in your midst, or I will demand it by right because this land was promised to me and my descendants. And obviously, Ephron said, okay, I'll sell it to you. And he indeed sold it to him for 400 silver coins, which is a very high price. But there's another interpretation connected to what I said a moment ago about the lives of Sarah, that the first matriarch is teaching us that as a Jewish people, we are all her descendants because she's the first Jewish woman. We always have to be cognizant and aware that we have two dimensions to our lives. We need to take care of our physical needs, obviously, in this world, but we have to remember that's not the ultimate goal of our existence. So basically, one of the commentaries I saw is quite beautiful, says that the term that Abraham teaches us, because all these stories are lessons for us in our lives. They're the foundational stories of our nation, of our ancestors. So they're teaching us lessons 3,800 years ago that we can learn from our great-great-grandparents. But he says, the term I am a stranger and a resident in your midst is talking about every single person. Why? Because we have two parts to our being, as we said. There's the body and the soul. Your body is a resident, but your soul is the foreigner or the stranger. Why is that so? Because, and the word ger could be foreigner, stranger, sojourner, right? Our body comes from this world, okay? To use what the Torah said in Genesis with the creation of Adam and Eve, God said, from dust you come, to dust you shall return, which means that your body is very much physical and part of this world. It's a resident in this world. When a person dies and they are laid to rest, they become permanent residents of the world. They are permanently a part of the world, right? But the soul is a foreigner. The soul is a sojourner. The soul is a stranger in this land. Why? Because the soul originates from God in heaven, descends into this physical world to live a span of time in this world. And then when a person dies, their soul returns to God. So it's like a sojourner that is traveling through this world as a alien, as a foreigner. And therefore, I am both a resident and a dweller of this. I'm a resident and a dweller, but I'm also a sojourner and a foreigner and an alien. My soul is a foreigner in this world. My body is part of this world. And the lesson behind this story is, if you were traveling on a destination, you wanted to go relocate and live, I don't know, in Israel, okay? But you decided you're going to spend a month on the way and live in Europe somewhere, right? You're going to take out a hotel room or maybe Airbnb, but you're not going to start buying furniture and things like that because I'm only here for a few weeks. I'm on the way to my final destination, which is, let's say, the land of Israel. And spiritually, the same thing is true here. Yes, we have to take care of all of our needs in this world, but we shouldn't become too focused or embedded in the material surroundings of this world because it's all temporary. Now, temporary can mean 80 years, 90 years, 100 years, hopefully 120 if you're very lucky. But compared to eternity, it's temporary. And therefore, remember that you're only a sojourner, you're only a foreigner, you're only an alien. And our main purpose in this world is the journey of the soul, because the journey of the soul and the benefit of the soul coming into this world is for eternal benefits, not just temporary benefits. And there's an old story, they tell it about different rabbis, but I heard about the Mizrich Maggid, Rabbi Ber of Mizrich, that he was once visited by someone who came to town, a wealthy man, and when he came to the home of the Mizrich Maggid, he saw that the rabbi lived in great poverty. He had very little by way of material possessions, and the guest was very surprised. He says, Rabbi, where's your furniture? Where's your possessions? And the rabbi turned to this wealthy man and says, where's your furniture and your possessions? He said, well, back at home, I have lots of nice furniture, a beautiful home, but I'm just traveling through. I don't take my furniture with me wherever I go. And the rabbi, of course, said, well, I'm also just traveling through. So recognize that what's everlasting is our soul's mission and purpose in this world. Everything else is temporary. So that's another lesson of the life of Sarah. Now, in the opening verse, it says the life of Sarah was 100. I told you she lived 127 years, right? But here's the way the verse says it. The lifespan of Sarah was 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. If someone says, how old are you? And you're 65. You don't say, I'm 60 years old and 5 years old. You say, I'm 65. If you're blessed to be 110, you don't say, if you're 112, you don't say, I'm 2 years old, 10 years old, and 100 years old. You say, I'm 112. The verse should have said Sarah was 127 years old, but it doesn't say that. It says she was 100 years old, 20 years old, and 7 years old. So, of course, Rashi wants to know why. Why does it say it in three different segments, three different portions, 100, 20, and 7? So, I once heard this joke that ties into what I was saying. Someone said there's 3 stages to life. There's youth, middle age, and hey, you look great. So the point is that life could be divided into 3 sections, right? There's childhood, there's maturity, and then there's old age. So if you look at the 3 ages of Sarah's lifespan, 127, there's the number 7, which is childhood. There's the number 20, which represents full maturity. And then there's the age of 100, which is old age. So 7, 20, and 100. 127 years broken into 3 categories, saying her life had all 3 categories: childhood, maturity, and old age, right? But listen to this beautiful interpretation from Rashi, and I think this is so relevant to all of our lives. And it's fascinating to see the rabbis discussing the Torah thousands of years ago, and it's so relevant for our current modern, psychology. All confers with what is being said here. Our rabbis say like this: at the age of 7, she was a beautiful little girl, but at the age of 20, she was as beautiful as the age of 7. That's the first comment Rashi says. And then No, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. The age of 20, a 7-year-old girl is innocent, right? She hasn't done anything wrong. She's pure, she's innocent, she's untainted by life, right? Doesn't have any sin. So at the age of 20, which is when you're mature and your desires are raging at the age of 20, right? She was as innocent and sinless or guiltless as she was at the age of 7. And at the age of 100, she was as beautiful. Okay, I keep on mixing this up. I'm sorry. Let's go with this again. 7 is the age of beauty. 20 is the age of innocence, because till 20, you're forgiven for your sins. And therefore, the rabbi said, at the age of 100, she was as guiltless, as righteous as the age of 20. The age of 20, as innocent, as beautiful as the age of 7. Now, what are the rabbis saying here? Now, a 20-year-old girl is beautiful too. What's the difference between a 7-year-old girl's beauty and a 20-year-old girl's beauty? A 7-year-old girl's beauty is innocent beauty. It's not a vain beauty. It's a beauty that you're unaware of. You're not. So at the age of 20, which is obviously an age that Sarah was very beautiful, we know that Sarah was a beautiful woman, she had the same beauty as a 7-year-old, which means it wasn't a beauty that brought any vanity to her. It was just a pure, innocent beauty. And at the age of 100, she was as righteous at the age of 20, because it says up till 20, you're forgiven for all your sins. But to just zoom out and look at this message in a broader context, what it's saying is that, we have different stages of our lives. It could be 3 stages: childhood, adulthood, and old age, right? Or you could have multiple stages in your life, right? But what our rabbis is telling us is that as we transition from one stage of life to the next, we have to take with us what we've gained and what we've acquired in that stage of life and carry it into the next segment of the journey of our life. So at the age of 7, she had the beauty of innocence. She took that into the age of 20. The age of 20, she had no sins, because up until 20, you're forgiven. She took that for the rest of her life. So what the rabbis are saying is that we don't have different stages of life and then we leave that stage and move on to a new stage. Every stage of life comes with us into the future stages. And it's really one cohesive, fluid continuum of life. And whether we consciously are aware of it or not, every previous stage of life is with us. And hopefully we could take all the good things from our previous stages of life through all the days of our life, till 127, like with Sarah. And why do I say this is such a ancient but modern interpretation? We all know what psychology is all about today, especially Freudian psychology, right? That what happened in our formative years of life, and it's funny that the first stage is 7, right? Because I think that's the number that psychologists use. The first 7 years of our life is when all the neurological wiring of our brain takes place. And what we experienced in our home with our parents, with our loved ones, whether we came from a home that was embracing and warm and supportive and secure, or God forbid, if you came from a dysfunctional, abusive, neglectful home, right? It's very hard to, let's start with the positive. You take that with you for the rest of your life. So people who are 70, 80 years old and they feel comfortable in their own skin, they feel secure and they feel confident and they're healthy, emotionally healthy, psychologically healthy, they may think, oh, it's because I'm 70 years old and I'm at this stage of my life that I arrived at that. It was really planted in their early childhood. And people who are unfortunately struggling later on in life and don't feel valued or healthy or secure or loved or know how to, act lovingly towards others, it very much is rooted in their childhood as well. And that's why people deal with this, to try to uncover what went wrong in my childhood, that I feel this way, that I have these, and how do I go back and correct it and fix it. But we know this now in psychology, that what happened in those early childhood years, even if we don't recall what happened, but what we witnessed in our home, the relationship of our parents to each other, the relationship of our parents to ourselves, all of that stays with us for the rest of our life. And that's what the rabbis are saying. At the age of 20, she was like 7, 100, like 20. In other words, all the stages carried forth into all the days of her life. So that's just an interesting comment on the opening verse of this week's Torah portion. By the way, as I always say, if anyone has questions or comments, imagine we're in a big room and you have a question, just you don't even have to raise your hand, just put it in the chat box. And finally, another classic interpretation on the last 3 words of the first verse. It says this was the lifespan of Sarah, 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years, and then it repeats itself at the end. These were the life of the years of Sarah. And of course, Rashi says, why repeat it twice? It said this is the life of Sarah, 127 years. Why at the end does it have to say, again, this was the lifespan of Sarah? And a very, very famous answer is Rashi's answer. It's very, very powerful words. Rashi says 3 words. It's teaching us that kulam shavim l'tova. They were all equally good. So it says, as a wrap-up of the verse, she lived 127 years. This was the lifespan of Sarah. All the days of her life were equally good. Now, all the commentaries cry out and say, what? How could you say that? All the days of the life of Sarah equally good. First of all, there's no such thing. There's no human being in the world that could say all the years of my life were equally good. We have good years and bad years. We had COVID, which was a terrible year. And now we have a war in Israel, which is a terrible year, right? And then we had the happy years of our life when things were going good, right? Everyone has ups and downs in their life. How could anyone, especially if you lived 127 years, say all the days of my life were equally good? So again, these are big questions with lots and lots of answers. Okay, so one simple answer is that it doesn't say all the days of her life were equally happy, because that's impossible. Some days are happier than others. What it says is they're equally good, meaning she was equally good in all the days. Throughout all the days of her life, she acted equally good. Whether she, sometimes people saying, I'm having a bad day, leave me alone, I have no emotional space to be, helpful or kind or whatever. Come to me when I'm having a good day, right? But not so Sarah. She was equally good all the days of her life, whether she was having a hard day, a time, a hard time, because she went through many challenges. First of all, she was barren until the age of 91. She was abducted twice by different kings. She went through famines. She went through aggravation with her maidservant and the son Ishmael. We know she had a lot of challenges in her life. So you can't possibly say they were all equally happy days, but equally good, that you can say. But another very powerful answer is, and this again is so relevant to all of our lives, just like the first answer is relevant. You have to be equally good all the days of your life, right? Not, hold 1 second, please. But another beautiful answer is as follows. They were all equally good. You know why? Because she discovered the meaning and the purpose and the good in everything she went through. Sometimes we go through a challenge in our lives, and we can't say it was easy. We can't say it was fun. We can't say it was enjoyable. We can't say that we were happy about it. It may have been really, really challenging and very painful and very difficult. But we could take that experience in our lives and we could channel the pain and the anguish and the struggle and the challenge and come to a point in our life that we could look back and say, that was a good experience. I wouldn't delete that from my life because I grew so much from it. I learned so much from that experience. I benefited from that negative experience. So, to give you a very silly example, you go to the gym and you work out for an hour and you're sweating and you're hurting every part of your body, right? But you don't say that was a bad experience. That was a great experience because I got so much strength and energy and, fitness out of it, right? Well, there's a spiritual gym. Sometimes we go through emotional strain and stress and struggle and challenges and hardships in life. But the question is how we come out on the other side. If we could come out of it and say, I grew from that experience. I became a better person as a result of that. I deepened my connection to God. Then it's not a negative experience. In hindsight, it was a positive experience. You know, our hearts and our minds are with our brothers and sisters in Israel. And I just want to say that I see that Sam Trink is on the phone. I mean, on the Zoom, and I know she's zooming in from Israel, which is really an honor to be learning Torah with Sam in Israel. And we pray for all of our brothers and sisters in Israel for protection and safety and health. But there's so many stories coming out. And just this morning, someone sent me a video of this man who, it looked like he was in his 30s, a young man. He told a story. He was, I guess, in the area where the terrorists came at like 7 o'clock in the morning. He was in his car, and suddenly he sees these white pickup trucks with the terrorists, and they're shooting. So he says he like took his hand, put his wife's head down, lowered his head. He said he put his foot on the gas all the way down and started speeding away. And he said like his head was down. He didn't want to pick up his head, that he's afraid he would get shot. So he was like, he didn't even see where he was going. He just hit the gas and went as fast as he can go. And he started to scream, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. He said it's a miracle. The bullets were flying all around him and none hit his car somehow. And he managed to get away and survive. He was him, his wife, and his brother-in-law was in the backseat. And this man was speaking, and he said, I'm not a religious person. I never was a religious person. But he says, I went to my rabbi afterwards, and I said, can't believe I survived. I was right there. They were shooting at me. It's a miracle. And his rabbi said to him that whoever survived because God's saying your job is not over. There's something you need to do. And basically this fellow said in this video that I never kept Shabbat in my life, but the last 2 weeks I kept Shabbat with my family, and I'm telling my, and I'm starting to learn Torah, and in other words, this very, very horrific, traumatic, near-death experience, basically, which was most probably the worst experience of his life, has led to something so positive in his life. And he talks about the joy of sitting around the table with his children at the Shabbat dinner for the last 2 weeks and discovering, his spiritual calling. So God forbid nobody should know from such horrors, but whatever challenges we go through, we could always utilize it as a transformative moment. And that's the way Sarah was able to say all the days of our life were good. Thank you. Okay, Sam's back in the States, I see. Okay, so you could say all the days of your life are equally good if you could see. Okay, when you go back, you should go with peace and safety. So if you could say that everything led to something positive, then you could say all the days of your life were equally good. Spend a few more minutes on this story and then go to another major story of this week's Torah portion. But another, there's a famous question that Rashi asks: why did Sarah die? And our rabbis say that the end of last week's Torah portion was the binding of Isaac. And it was actually when Sarah heard the news that Abraham took Isaac for the binding, her soul departed from her body, which means she died of shock to hear the news that Abraham took Isaac to the binding. And she didn't realize that the angel came and spared the life of Isaac. And just the interesting observation I heard was that we know that Sarah was a higher prophetess, a greater prophetess than even Abraham. So why is it that Abraham passed the test? God said he's going to test Abraham, and Abraham was ready to take Isaac to the binding, and Sarah died of shock. Was Sarah on a lower spiritual level than Abraham? And the answer is that, and this is a very important principle to know. The Talmud says 3 words in Aramaic: Lefum Gamla Shichna, which means according to the strength of the donkey, that's how much you loaded up with. What does that mean? It means to say is that God only gives you what you can handle in life. And if God gives you a big burden, a big challenge, he gives you extra strength to be able to withstand it. Because God wouldn't give you something you can't handle. So God loads the donkey, metaphorically, according to its capacity. And if God is testing you with something big, he gives you extra strength to carry it. So what is the difference between Abraham and Sarah? The binding of Isaac was a test of Abraham. It says God tested Abraham. So because Abraham was being tested, he was given extra strength to pass the test. But since Sarah was not being tested, Sarah only heard the news through someone who notified her that Abraham took her son. She didn't have that extra strength. And therefore, unfortunately, she passed away from the news. But I'll just tell you another interesting play of words. If you know Hebrew, Rashi quotes the rabbis that say, Parcha Nishmata, which means her soul flew away. I mean, her soul departed from its body. The word parcha could mean to fly. But the word parcha in Hebrew, if there's anyone who knows Hebrew on the call, you'll appreciate this very much. The word parcha, the word perech, is a flower. Parcha means the flowering, the blooming, the blossoming. So you could either translate it, her soul flew away from her body in shock of the news, or her soul flowered, blossomed, and left the body. What's the difference? So according to the second interpretation is, yeah, her soul flew off. But you know why it flew off? Because it blossomed. When she heard the news that her son was ready to go and listen to God's commandment and be an offering to God, she said, I raised the son with such complete trust and faith in God. That's when her soul fully blossomed and bloomed as a mother. And that's why she fulfilled her mission in this world. And that's why her soul was able to leave her body. By the way, Abraham comes and eulogizes his wife. And the verse says, he came to cry and eulogize Sarah. And the rabbis say, why the emphasis that he came to eulogize Sarah? Well, obviously, he came to eulogize his wife who died. And the rabbis say there's a discussion when you give a eulogy at a funeral, who is the eulogy for? I don't know if you ever thought of this question. When someone gives a eulogy at a funeral, is the eulogy for the dead, meaning to honor the dead person, or is the eulogy for the living, so that the family members should be comforted? Now, obviously, it's not mutually exclusive. It could be to honor the dead and to comfort the family. The eulogy has a dual purpose. But the verse is emphasizing that the main eulogy was for Sarah. In other words, the main purpose of the eulogy, yes, the living hear the eulogy and they benefit from the words of the eulogy because it gives them comfort and strength, hearing the praises of their loved one. But the main purpose of a eulogy is to honor the deceased person, so that the soul of the deceased person could hear what is being said about that person. And that's a comfort for the soul as it leaves this world. And this is something actually the rabbis also derive from the verse. It says, Abraham rose up from the face of his dead after he buried Sarah. The rabbis say, we learn here that a person is buried on their back, that he rose up from the face of Sarah, but also that just like a face represents interaction, right? I see your face, you see my face, that until the person is laid to rest, the soul is very much present and hears everything that's being said at the funeral. And therefore, when you give a eulogy or you hear a eulogy, the deceased are listening to what you're saying about them, because you're in their face, so to speak. You're before their face. Now, I just want you to know something very interesting. I just want to see, I saw someone put up a comment. So I love comments. So it says, is the blossoming of the soul related to neshama having an aliyah? Yes, you could say that. The soul is elevated. And we know that when a person dies, it means they fulfill their mission in this world. So the soul blossomed and reached its full potential. Going back to eulogies, I'm just going to give you the polar opposite extreme. You know, in certain communities, including Chabad, the custom is that no eulogies are given at a funeral. That's right. You heard me right. It sounds shocking. But take the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was the greatest tzaddik of our generation. I attended his funeral. I was a student in the yeshiva then. There was not one speech or one eulogy given at his funeral. Imagine, the greatest leader of the generation, there was no words of eulogy given, because that's the custom in Chabad. And this is all the funerals that take place in Chabad. there's no eulogy. And the question is, why not? Even Abraham eulogized his wife. What's going on here? And we know eulogies is a Jewish tradition. We find it. So why no eulogies? And the answer, one of the main reasons is because, as I told you, the soul hears what's being said. But just because the soul has now transitioned into a world of complete truth, in our world, there's a lot of falsehood. There's a lot of flattery, right? People say things that aren't necessarily true. So in this world, we enjoy it when someone says something that's a little exaggerated about you. Yeah, you don't mind it. It's nice to hear good things about yourself. But when the soul hears something that's not true, that's an exaggeration, that's not completely truthful, it's actually a pain and an anguish for the soul. And that's the tradition why, because we don't know how to give proper eulogies today, we tend to go overboard, we tend to exaggerate, we tend to say things that aren't completely truthful and accurate by only looking at the goodness, right? Therefore, it could be a pain for the soul because the soul senses what's being said about it. So it's just interesting to see this idea played out in tradition and in practices. So we only have about 17 minutes. So I want to go to what I would call the main event of this week's Torah portion. The bulk of this week's Torah portion is about the famous song, Matchmaker, Matchmaker, Make Me a Match, right? Shidduchim, which means matchmaking. We all know that in Jewish communities, there's always been, and there still is, in many communities, matchmakers. They're called shadchans, right? So who is the first biblical matchmaker? And of course, that is our Torah portion. Abraham just buried his wife, Sarah. He's an older man now, and he says, I have a son, Isaac, who was taken to the binding last week and survived because the angel saved his life. And he says, 1 minute, he's still single and he's 40 years old. You got to get him married, because if he doesn't get married, there's no continuity, there's no heir, there'll be no grandchildren, there'll be no continuity to the Jewish people. And God said, we'll be like the stars in the heaven. So he needs to find a wife. But Abraham's maybe an older man, so he calls his servant. Now, he had a number of servants, Abraham, but the verse says he called his top servant. Eliezer was the servant who ruled over everything that Abraham had, meaning he was his most trusted servant, confidant, who had full access to everything in the household of Abraham. And he said to his servant Eliezer, I need you to go on a mission for me. I need you to go back to Haran, which is where he had come from originally, and find a suitable young woman for my son Isaac to marry. Now, you must probably know the story, so I'm not going to go over all the details, but just to refresh your memory, Eliezer travels off with donkeys and gifts, and he goes looking for a girl. He arrives in Haran. Haran was where Abraham originated from. He liked the people of that town. They were good-natured people. It's interesting how certain towns have a reputation of being good-natured people, certain communities. Now, their ideology wasn't so good. They were idol worshippers. As a matter of fact, Rebecca, who he ultimately chooses, her father and brother was an idolater. She came from a house of idolatry. But that didn't concern Abraham, because you see, ideology is not hereditary. Now, true, you teach your kids your beliefs, but it's not hereditary, meaning it's not part of your genetics. It's an educational, philosophical, ideological understanding. Well, I could always teach you a new way of understanding things. So Abraham figured, okay, we'll get a girl, even if she comes from a house of idolatry, she'll marry Isaac, she'll come into my house, we'll teach her to believe in one God. But the one thing that is somewhat hereditary and more embedded in your soul is your character traits. It's much easier to change your ideology or your belief system, right? If I explain to you why your belief system is incorrect, and you could shed that belief system and realize you have a negative or improper or unfounded belief system, right? And by the way, this applies to all of us, not just in religious matters. We adopt many beliefs about life and the world, going back to that childhood conversation, right? Sometimes we get older, we have to say, what are these beliefs that are restricting me, that are holding me back? What did I come to believe about myself that's false, right? So beliefs are easier to undo. But your nature, if somebody has a nature of being cruel, or someone has a nature of being angry all the time, or bitter, or resentful, whatever it is, it's much harder to change your character traits, your nature, okay? Because it's not like the mind that you could change the file, so to speak. It's your emotions, it's your character, it's your essence, right? So Abraham says, what I want is a good-natured person. Once you have a good-natured person, they're going to want to do the right thing, and they're going to want to acknowledge God, and so on and so forth. So Eliezer goes off, and he arrives at the well. Now, we know in the Torah, the well was always the meeting place in town, because everyone had to come to the well to get water. And Eliezer says to God, listen, help me find the right girl for my master Isaac's son Isaac to marry. So he makes a sign. And our rabbis say this teaches us a great deal about marriage, what we should look for in a spouse. What do you look for? Sometimes people look for the wrong things. They look for ego. They look for money. They look for power. They look for someone who's very attractive physically, right? But that's not the real qualities that you should look for in a marriage. You should look for someone who is kind and loving and generous and caring and so on and so forth. So he comes to the well and he says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a test. I'm going to approach girls and say, hey, I'm a stranger in town. Can I get some water from your bucket? Because all the girls were coming to draw water. Can you give me some water to drink? If the girl says, yeah, sure, here's some water. That's very nice, but not good enough. Because, yeah, she's very kind, but I'm not just looking for kind. I'm looking for special. What's special? Special is that she will say, yes, I will get water for you, and I will also draw water for your camels. Because Eliezer came with 10 camels loaded with gifts and presents for this girl. So he says, when I see the girl who says, I will give water for you and your camels, she goes above and beyond what I request. This is the girl that is destined to marry Isaac. And the first girl he approaches is Rebecca. Rebecca's coming down to draw water. And he says, young lady, can I get some water to drink? I'm thirsty. And Rebecca says, absolutely. And then she adds the famous words, V'gam l'gamalecha eshov. I will also draw water for your camels. And he goes, bingo. I can't even believe it that he got God answered his sign. The first girl was the right girl. And sure enough, at that point, he says to, listen, I know a guy for you. You're not going to believe it. And she invites him home to the family, and she tells the family the story, how this is. And by the way, we always say the word bashert, right? What does bashert mean? That is a match made in heaven, right? Who was the one who said these words? It was actually Eliezer. When he told the family the story, I came to the well, I said, the girl who I asked for water and she offers for the camels, this is the right girl. And then your daughter came along and said, I'll draw for the camels, and answered my prayer. So her very own father, Bituel, says, so he basically says, could I take your daughter to marry Isaac? And he says, the father, Mehashem Yatzah Hadavar. This emanates from God. This is a marriage made in heaven. How can we deny it? How can we dispute it? How can we not accept it? It's clearly a sign from heaven that she is meant to marry Isaac. So this is the famous story of the kindness of Rebecca, which made her suitable to be the second matriarch of the Jewish people. And like I said, it's a very long story, and it's told in great detail to illustrate that when we go looking for a spouse, that's the most important quality to seek out in a marriage. But I want to draw your attention to the end of the story, and obviously there's so many details and so many midrashim, Talmudic stories to explain so much about marriage that we learn from this section. But I want to just focus at the closing verse. And by the way, chapter 24 in Genesis, which is the entire story of the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah through the matchmaker Eliezer, is the longest chapter in the entire Torah. It has a grand total of 67 verses, making it the longest section. So it tells you how important matchmaking and marriages is, that it becomes the longest chapter in the whole Torah. But after Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, brings Rebekah back to the land of Canaan, which was Israel, where they were living, it says that he introduces her to Isaac, and Isaac marries her. And the closing verse, which is the verse 67 of the chapter 24, says, Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah and took Rebekah as a wife, and he loved her. And the last four words of the verses, Vayinachem Yitzchak achrei emo. For the first time since the passing of his mother, which was the beginning of the Torah portion, now that he was married, he found comfort in from the loss of his mother. Now, literally it means, okay, he has a woman in his life now. He lost his mother. He was grieving. Now he has a woman to love, his wife, and he finds a measure of comfort. But Rashi deepens the understanding of these verses, and he says as follows, that when he took Rebekah into the tent of his mother, he realized and he saw that Rebekah, his wife, was just like his mother. And when he saw that she had the same good qualities of his mother, that's what brought him the measure of comfort. And Rashi gets very specific. Rashi says there were three phenomenons, I should say, and some of it is either miraculous or it's metaphoric. But Rashi says there were three characteristics that, or phenomenons that were visible and recognizable and demonstrative in the life of Sarah. And when Sarah died, these three signs, these three indications, or these three phenomenons, as I said before, ceased to exist. And when he married Rebekah, they resumed again. And that's how he knew that she was the embodiment of all of the good qualities of his late mother, Sarah. What were these three things that were exhibited in the lifetime of Sarah? So Rashi tells us what they were. And of course, Rashi is quoting the rabbis in the Talmud. And our rabbis say as follows. The first thing is, when Sarah lit her candles on Friday night, Shabbat candles, and again, I told you, you could take this literally as a miracle or metaphorically, her candles burned from Friday night to Friday night. You know, like the miracle of Hanukkah when the oil kept them burning for 8 days. Well, Sarah's candles burned for 7 days. You know, you and I light our Shabbos candles Friday night, and 3 hours later, they burn out. Okay, the candle burnt out. Sarah's candles burnt all week long. When Rebekah lit her candles after she married Isaac, the candles also burnt all week long. And he said, you see, she's just like my mother. Now, whether it's literal and miraculous or metaphorically would mean, what is the candles? The candles of Shabbat represents the sanctity of the home, the cohesiveness of the home, the warmth of the home, the love of the family, the unity, right? Everyone lights the candle, sits around the candle, Shabbat dinner, everything that it represents, the spirituality of the home, the godliness, right? So sometimes, okay, we have Shabbat dinner, it lasts for an hour or two, the candles burn, and we feel that spiritual glow of the candles in our home, of Shabbat, of holiness, we make Kiddush, but then when it's over, it's over. Sarah's candles burn from Friday night to Friday night, which means that warmth, that spirituality, that holiness permeated the home all week long until the next Friday night when she lit the candles again. That's one characteristic. The second thing that our rabbis say is that there was a blessing in the dough. You know, Shabbat dinner, the meal is so wonderful. Everyone's so satisfied and appreciative. Everything is delicious and wonderful. Our rabbis call that a blessing in the dough. What does a blessing in the dough mean? That there's a blessing in your food. What does your blessing in your food mean? That you are always content, you're always happy, you're always satisfied. It's again metaphoric, you know, that your dough, you know, it's funny in English, you say make some dough is money. but dough means your physical sustenance, your food, your bread, right? So you could have a blessing in your dough or not have a blessing in your dough. A blessing in your dough means that whatever you eat, whatever you're given, whatever your lot in life is, whatever your material possessions are. Again, the bread and the dough is representative of all your physical nourishments and sustenance. There's always a blessing in the dough, which means you're always satisfied. You're always content. Sometimes you eat a meal and I'm not satisfied. I want more. I'm hungry, right? Well, the meal is reflective of life. You could get a paycheck, or you could have a house, or you could have whatever you have, and you're like, it's not enough. I want more. I'm unfulfilled. I'm unsatisfied, so on and so forth. As opposed to, I'm content. There's a blessing in my dough. I'm blessed with whatever I have. I always feel satisfied, content, happy, appreciative, grateful, and so on and so forth. So in Sarah's home, there was always a blessing in the dough. There was always that feeling of happiness, of contentment, of gratitude. When he saw Rebecca had those same qualities, once again, she was comforted for the loss of his mother. And the second and the last thing was that when Sarah was alive, there was a cloud over the tent. When she passed away, the cloud departed. And now the cloud came back over the tent. Now, what does the cloud over the tent mean? It's like the mezuzah on your door. It means divine protection. And meaning that there was a presence of God in the home. There was a feeling of there's something above our home, that our home is not just our independent dwelling place where we live, but rather God's presence is above us, just like the yarmulke on your head for men reminds us of God's presence. The cloud on the house reminds us of Hashem dwelling with us in our home. And once again, he sensed that same feeling of God's presence in his home that he had felt with his mother's presence as well. So there's a lot going on in this Torah portion, but as you can see, a lot of it is about Jewish women and the continuity and what the blessings that Jewish women bring to a home and to a family and how it's transmitted from generation to generation. And how Isaac now finds a woman who is like his mother to carry on his mother's life and legacy and mission in this world. And this has been transmitted to all Jewish women and to their families through the Jewish women, because the women are the foundation of the Jewish home. That's why the Eshet Chayil song is sung on Friday nights for the Jewish woman of valor. And by the way, there's a tradition that the Eshet Chayil that King Solomon wrote with all of it's like an acrostic based on all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which lauds and praises the Jewish woman. Its origin, according to tradition, is the eulogy that Abraham gave for his wife Sarah. That King Solomon based his song of woman of valor, Eshet Chayil, on the words of praise that Abraham gave for his wife Sarah when he eulogized her in the beginning of this week's Torah portion. So it sort of all comes together in a very meaningful and powerful way. And the idea, and again, every Torah portion is history, but it's also very practical ramifications. And that is, we should try to be like Abraham, find matches for our children. We should try to be like Eliezer, be the servant, be the messenger to bring about these shidduchim. And I'll just tell you, I met with a couple. I have a couple of weddings coming up in the next few months for some couples that are marrying. And I met with this couple from our synagogue, and we were meeting the other day, and I said, he's from Palm Beach and she's from New York. And I said, how did you guys meet up? And this young lady tells me a beautiful story that basically she was at a wedding and she met this woman at the wedding. And I guess they were talking. And this woman told her that she has a daughter that she's looking for a shidduch, for a match for. Like modern Orthodox. So they kept in touch, and she likes to help people in this regard. She's single herself, but I guess she knew some guys that weren't good for her, that she thought maybe is good for this woman's daughter. So she stayed in touch with her with different suggestions. None of them worked out. One day, this woman calls her and says, I think I have somebody for you. Someone that she had looked into for her daughter wasn't the right one. Maybe this is for you. And put her in touch with this guy in our shul from Florida. And at first she was like, they made up to speak, but then she said, I'm in New York, he's in Florida. I got opportunities here. I'm not really interested along this relationship. So she called it off. She decided not to call him. She said, let's not bother because, it's not going to work. I'm in New York, you're there. But then a couple of months later, her parents bought a place here in Palm Beach County, and she was coming down to see the new place. So she called this guy and said, I happen to be coming to Florida. My parents just got a place here. If you want, we'll go out for a drink. Well, they're engaged to be married in a couple of months from now, right? So the idea that she was trying to help this woman with a shidduch for her daughter, and it turned out that that woman helped her find her shidduch, right? So we always supposed to think about who do we know for who can we try to set up? And even if it doesn't work out, we shouldn't be disappointed because you never know what may come about from that introduction. So thank you all for joining and have a wonderful week. And as you know, we're having a special Friday dinner this week. So please join us in the shul and look forward to seeing everyone. Have a good day. All the best. Bye.